Hello, everyone. I'm happy you've made time to join us today for this session of Which Review is Right for You? Understanding Review Types in Research. There's many different options when it comes to review types, which is a question we often get. A key element before getting started in Confidence is deciding on the type of review you want to undertake. Factors such as your research question, subject area, and size of your team will all play a part in deciding which review is right for you. Just some housekeeping before we begin. Today's session is being run in a standard webinar mode, which means all attendees are muted. For those of you in Zoom, please ask questions at any time using the Q&A box. And for those of you joining us on our YouTube live stream, please ask your questions in the chat. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be sent to your registered email about 24 hours after the session concludes. My name's Stephanie Harkins. I'm a Community Support Manager at Confidence, and I'm joined today by my colleagues Nancy, Laura, Delindia, and Razia, who will be in the chat and Q&A answering your questions. But our presenter for the day is Tamara Lotfi. Tamara is a Senior Evaluation Specialist at the International Initiative for Impact Evaluation, a co-convenor for the Campbell and Cochrane Equity Thematic Group, and the Managing Editor for International Development Coordinating Group. Before I turn it over to Tamara, though, I'm going to provide a little bit of contextual information about Confidence. Confidence is a not-for-profit organization created by and for the research community, and it's designed to streamline the review process from the title and abstract screening through to the extraction and risk of bias. The platform allows our review teams to significantly reduce the amount of time spent on reviews, meaning that people are able to produce high-quality evidence faster. The platform is entirely cloud-based, and we pride ourselves in supporting the world's largest review community with over 600,000 users around the globe and over 450 institutional partners and many millions of research hours saved. We are also the official platform for Cochrane authors. And as far as the scope of the webinar today, we're not going to be diving into Confidence as a tool, but rather learning about the different review types Confidence can support. So selecting your review type takes place at the beginning stages of formulating your research question and protocol, which does happen prior to beginning your work in Confidence. I do have a poll to launch for you all. You should see that pop up in Zoom and in YouTube. We'll put that in the chat. The question is, what is your main reason for conducting a review? University requirement, publication goal, personal or professional interest, part of a funded research project, or you're not sure yet. You can select multiple of those. For those of you in YouTube, you can list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or multiple combinations of that number if multiple apply to you. I'll give you guys a few more seconds to put in your answers. All right, thank you. I'm going to end the poll now and share the results. So it looks like about half, a little over half are with a publication goal. We've got 42% personal professional interest, 31% university requirement, 21% part of a funded research project. So thank you guys for filling that out, and thank you all in YouTube for submitting your answers. Some of you may already be familiar with our free ebook series that we already have covering the topics of protocol development, screening, and data extraction. We will be launching another free ebook soon in this series titled Understanding Review Types in Research. So directly related to this webinar content, you can scan the QR code or click the link in the chat to sign up to be notified when it launches. You can also try Confidence for free by clicking on the QR code or in the link that we'll place in the chat. If you haven't signed up already, you can give it a try. We'd be happy to have you join our research community. And with that, I will turn it over to Tamara.
Thank you, Stephanie. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Very happy to be here today. Let's make sure you can all see my screen. And all right, gonna get a thumb up from the Confidence team that my screen is clear and everything's good. Yeah, awesome. All right, so thanks for joining, everyone. And thanks, Stephanie, for the introduction. I'm very excited here today to share with you what I've learned about the types of reviews, specifically types of evidence synthesis. Now, before we start, I'd like to declare a few things. First, I have no financial conflicts of interest to declare. Second, the International Initiative for Impact Evaluation, 3IE, is a creator of evidence gap maps, which I will describe in this session. The content of this presentation builds on the work of experts in the field. All references will be listed at the end, and also the awesome Confidence team will help me disseminate the resources as we go. And if you're joining us today to learn all about evidence synthesis for the first time, today is the day for you, because the intended audience is junior researchers and other interest holders who are eager to join the universe of evidence synthesis. So in terms of the outline of our session, we'll start with addressing what evidence synthesis is. We'll talk about the questions and type of questions that we could formulate when developing or conceptualizing your research work. We'll talk about the different types of reviews, and then we'll quickly go through artificial intelligence, as I expect many of you are keen and eager to specifically talk about that. And we will have time for questions at the end, but as Stephanie mentioned, you could also use the Q&A option in Zoom or on YouTube to provide your questions. Heads up, we will be using Slido. It will allow me to learn more about your experience, and I will have some questions for you. So when the time comes, there will be a link that you could click on and use a code, or there will be a QR code on the screen that you could scan using your phone. So we hope you'll be able to join us in these questions. So to start, before we jump directly to the types of evidence synthesis or reviews. Let's break this down. Typically in practice, we would have a practice question. And I'm saying practice here because regardless of whether your background is in clinical health, public health, health systems, outside health, we'll all have a practice question for which we'll need an answer. And we'll need to go to the literature to see what's out there and whether it could help us find an answer. And then that should inform our decision. The decision we'll make will have an impact, and any impact will also inform future research. Now, if we break this down, specifically for the practice question, where could questions related to practice come from? It could be a question coming from an existing research agenda or a priority setting exercise. It could be from a need to standardize practice. So we're picking up on variations and we want to see how we could standardize practice. It could be because we're aware that there is a gap in practice, and so we need to build a research project to find an answer. Or it could be that there's ongoing practices, but we know there's new evidence that could or not modify the way we do things. And last but not least, among others, of course, it could be that an interest holder, such as a healthcare worker, a policymaker, a caregiver, a patient, has a request for us. And so this is our starting point with the question. Now, if we know that we have a particular question, where do we go and find literature to answer our question? And for that, I ask you to scan the QR code or use the link in the chat and the Slido code specifically 4049061, and let us know where you typically search for literature. I'll give it 20 seconds. And I encourage you all to give us your answers. I see them coming in. Wonderful. And so what we see right now is that there's a lot of use of PubMed and Google Scholar and Medline, among other places. Excellent. So please keep your answers coming. We will not stop this question yet. It will serve us at the end. And so, just like many of you have mentioned, searching for the literature could take place in different places. So first, we could look at electronic databases and repositories, such as Embase, Medline, or the Campbell Library, or Central, the Registry for Trials by Cochrane. We could also aim to look for gray literature, and that would include theses, governmental websites, institutional repositories. And so for thesis, for example, we could use ProQuest dissertations and Thesis Global to find them. We could also use Google Scholar to find gray literature. Now, how do we choose how many databases we will search? Is one enough? Do we need all 8? Do we need 10? How long is our literature going to be including? So what is the time period of research that will be included? So these are questions that we should think of as we are doing our search. And so if we've built our question and done our search for literature, and then we're trying to make a decision, the strength of our decision or the value of our decision would really depend on a couple criteria, and I'll name 4 of them here. First, the relevance between the studies that we've found or the literature that I've identified to the question that I've started with. Second, the comprehensiveness of my question itself, of my search itself. So was I actually able to capture everything out there? Do I need to capture everything out there? How credible are the studies that I'm including? Would that affect the credibility of my own evidence synthesis or review? And last, is my work replicable? How can I be transparent in every step that I'm taking to allow others to replicate my work? And so thinking about all these things, we realize that there is a need for a structured, systematic process to answer research and practice questions by using all relevant existing evidence. Thus, evidence synthesis. So evidence synthesis can be defined as the review of what is known from existing research using systematic and explicit methods in order to clarify the evidence base. The research questions addressed and the methods used by such synthesis vary considerably, but they are all based on the principles of rigor and transparency, and we'll go into further details. But what we can learn from this definition is that for my practice question, my question has to be very well defined using specific formats before I start my research. When looking for the literature, I have to have a very comprehensive search. And then to be able to make a decision as part of an evidence synthesis piece, I need to follow transparent and explicit methods for searching, screening, data extraction, critical appraisal where applicable, and synthesis of findings. Let's break down evidence synthesis. So to conduct an evidence synthesis, there are many steps, and I choose to show the roadmap format or visual because it really is not a straight line. There will be ups and downs. There will be some steps that will take more, more time or other resources than others. And it's all important to know before you dive into any type of evidence synthesis. So we'll start with, as we mentioned, constructing a research question. Then we'll decide on the scope, the breadth, and the depth that we're aiming for. We'll invite an information specialist to design our search. We'll register a protocol when we can. We'll conduct a search, we'll screen, and we'll extract the data. We'll appraise the evidence, we'll synthesize, and we'll disseminate. These would be the typical steps. And so if we want to focus again on constructing the research question, why is that important? Because if my research question from the beginning is not very nicely formulated, its components are not clear, that will impact my search strategy. That will also impact my eligibility criteria, which are actually directly informed by these components of the search of the research question. And so, as you see, it's a domino effect later on. So how can I formulate my research question? There are many formats that would help you structure your question. And it's important because once we have our components of our question, once we understand what it is that we're looking for, then we'll be able to actually look at the types of evidence synthesis and choose the right one for our question. And I have to acknowledge here that I am stating some of these. There are probably more options to how you could formulate your question, but we're going to be using those that are most frequently connected to the types of evidence synthesis we'll show in this session. So for all of you, whether you're junior or advanced, PICO should be the most common format that you are familiar with. And so PICO refers to population, intervention, comparator, and outcome. And it's the typical format for an effectiveness question, for an impact evaluation. And in some cases, you'll add time and designs of PICOTs as also important components of your question. This is, for example, when you are looking for something more focused. It could be used in trials or when exploring impact evaluations. When your interest is more in qualitative research, then you could follow the SPIDER question formulation format, and that would include sample, phenomenon of interest, design, evaluation, and research type. If your focus is on an evaluation of interventions or policies or practices, then you could formulate your question following the SPICE format, which refers to setting, perspective, intervention interest, comparison, evaluation. Another format is ECLIPSE, and that's for health policy and management, and it includes expectation, client group, location, impact, professionals, service. And again, all these components are very important to define a priori and to set up very nicely in the beginning, because that will directly impact how the ease of your work and the future steps. Now, ProSet is one type of question formulation that is specific to prognosis questions. And there's similarly other formats for, let's say, diagnostic test accuracy and so on and so on. And for ProSet, it refers to population, prognostic factor, outcomes, setting, effect modifiers, confounders, and time frame. You don't have to know all of them. Start by PICO if you're starting new. Understand the impact of formulating your question in a nice way on the remaining steps of the synthesis, and then you will learn about the others depending on the need and the objectives of your work. So we formulated our question. What are the most common types of evidence synthesis that we might encounter or follow in order to answer our question? So for today's session, we'll focus on 3, and we'll compare them to a narrative review. And these 3 are systematic review, a scoping review, and an umbrella review or overview reviews. In this table here, I'm listing some of the key comparative factors, the strengths, excuse me, and limitations, and the timeline. And it's important to note that many of you might have already been using some AI tools to assist them in their evidence synthesis work. What I have here is based on non-AI assisted work. And so let's go through one by one. For a systematic review, that's an evidence synthesis that aims to answer a focused question. Its strengths is that a systematic review has high rigor, it's reproducible, it informs guidelines, it identifies gaps in primary studies. A systematic review is time intensive and would take on average 12 to 24 months. A scoping review is the type of review where you get to explore the relevant evidence, so sort of a mapping. It's more flexible than systematic review. The question is broader. It informs future research and identifies research gaps. Its limitations are that it does not require appraisal, which could mean its use is limited. So as you can imagine, if we're saying a systematic review would require appraisal versus a scoping review wouldn't, then if you're specifically planning to develop a study that will lead, an evidence synthesis that will lead you to actually being able to make a decision, not just understanding what's out there, then a systematic review would be your type of choice. A scoping review, alternatively, would help you more map and see what's out there. On average, a scoping review would take less time, so 6 to 12 months. but we have to be very clear that these timelines would vary between topics, within a discipline, between disciplines, between sectors. So it's all about the question and the breadth of the existing literature. An umbrella review, otherwise referred to as an overview of reviews, is a review of existing systematic reviews. And technically, it's a high-level overview. Its limitations are that it's resource intensive if it's a topic where there's a lot of systematic reviews already, and it inherits bias and quality issues from included reviews. It takes usually around on average, 6 to 12 months to conduct an umbrella review. Now, these three were evidence synthesis types. Alternatively, one type that you might be all familiar with is a narrative review, and that's not an evidence synthesis. It's a broad overview of the literature. Its strengths are that it's theoretical, it's flexible, it's informative. However, it is not rigorous, it is prone to bias because it does not follow a systematic process, and it tends to be less transparent. The timeline for a narrative review is flexible. So let's dig deeper into systematic reviews. Based on the poll or the questions that we've asked before joining this webinar, we learned that most of you are interested in learning mainly about systematic reviews and scoping reviews. So let's focus on systematic reviews. Systematic reviewers, so as we mentioned before, the question for a systematic review is focused. Its aim is to inform by identifying what's out there, so screening, searching, screening, extracting data to understand what is out there, and then appraising the quality to learn about the certainty evidence and so on. And so the systematic reviewers will synthesize what they found, all the evidence that they've captured and assessed by outcome and across studies. Reviewers should conduct meta-analysis where possible. Meta-analysis is the statistical component of a systematic review where, when feasible, we need to conduct it. And it typically combines the results from 2 or more studies addressing the same outcome to obtain a summary or a pooled estimate. In case you're not able to conduct a meta-analysis, then we'll follow a descriptive or narrative approach. And in this case, for example, we could provide ranges of magnitudes of effect or classify studies according to their direction of effect, magnitude of effect, or statistical significance. One output that would come out of your meta-analysis is the forest plot. As you can see here, this is a forest plot. If you're not familiar with forest plots, no worries. We just want you to see it and familiarize yourself with what it looks like and the key components of it. But this will not be the focus of our session. What's important to know is this forest plot is here for specific outcomes. It's presenting all the studies. So here we have a list of 11 studies, the ones in the rows. So it says author and year. 11 studies that were found to be relevant to a research question. And so we're pooled together, and you can see their separate individual effect estimates alongside the confidence intervals for each effect estimate, and then a final pooled effect estimate with its confidence interval. We won't go into details. The link to this particular systematic review will be shared and is found at the end. But important for you to see that there's individual effect estimates being pooled, and that's what the meta-analysis helps us do. Now, additionally, in a systematic review, we'll assess the certainty of the evidence and draw conclusions in a systematic way, and this is using the grading of recommendations, assessment, development, and evaluation grade approach. Grade classifies the certainty of evidence as high, moderate, low, and very low. And this is done by considering limitations in study design, in consistency, in precision, in directness, and publication bias, among other factors. And we have grade for assessing the certainty of the evidence of quantitative studies, and grade circle for qualitative studies when conducting a qualitative evidence synthesis. Now, moving to scoping reviews. Scoping reviews, on the other hand, provide a description of the available research, identifying key concepts, themes, and gaps in the existing knowledge base. They collate, combine, and summarize findings from the included studies, similarly to how we describe systematic reviews, but they limit themselves at organizing the included studies into meaningful categories based on factors like research design, population characteristics, intervention types, outcome measures, or theoretical frameworks. So what makes evidence synthesis different from narrative reviews? First of all, comprehensiveness. In any evidence synthesis, you'll need to search at least 2 electronic databases. It has to follow a well-developed search string, and this is why you need the support of an information specialist, especially when you're doing it for the first time, or when you're doing an evidence synthesis in a field that's new to you. And your search in an evidence synthesis will have very clear time periods. So are you including any literature published at any point? Are you aware that the particular intervention of interest only started being researched after 2005, and so you want to restrict your search between 2005 until today? Second, in evidence synthesis, we are very transparent, and so we follow reporting tools, which I'll mention later on. And in case we've undertaken any language or other restrictions, we have to be very transparent about those. Third, we follow a very high scientific rigor. So there are standards out there that you need to follow. When you're submitting your evidence synthesis for publication, the journal should ask you to cite the tools that you've used to report on your studies, but also if you've assessed the quality of included studies, what tools you've used, and so on and so on. And fourth, their producibility, and so the methods should be replicated, and that means your eligibility criteria should be very clear, and that will be one of the domains or items in reporting standards. All right, let's see how we're doing so far. I invite you all to take a quiz. It's going to be a nice short quiz. Scan the QR code or enter the link with the Slido code 4049061. And let's see how we are doing. All right, the first question of the quiz is, what type of review can help me choose an existing systematic review? And the options are narrative, systematic, scoping, umbrella. We'll give it 15 more seconds. All right, great. So let's look at the results for the first question. The majority said that umbrella reviews allow us to choose an existing systematic review, and that is correct. The next quiz question should be on your screen right now. All right, you are exploring the breadth of the literature on a new topic without assessing study quality or producing pooled estimates. Which method is most appropriate? And your options are narrative, systematic, scoping, umbrella. All right, let's see what our answers are. So the majority answered scoping reviews, which is the correct answer. Okay, should have gone for harder questions in this quiz. Let's launch our third question. Rapid reviews are quickly done and don't follow a systematic process. And you're answering this before we address rapid reviews. So let's see what you'll answer before we go through it. right. The majority said false. So again, the question was, rapid reviews are quickly done and don't follow a systematic process. And the correct answer was false. That's great. The next question is, a scoping review requires pooling the effect estimates from quantitative studies to generate an overall effect estimate. Okay, so we have 74% who said false and 26% who said true. The correct answer is false, as we said. Systematic reviews will allow us to, or we're required to pool effect estimates from quantitative studies. In scoping reviews, we typically don't pool the effect estimates from the included studies. All right, great. So we'll move to our next slides, but stay tuned. There'll be more questions for the quiz.
Tamara, just a note, the attendees are asking for longer time for the chat, to answer the polls, if possible.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think it's a feature where once it reaches past 250, it just doesn't really let us take on more answers. Okay. Sorry about that.
So please, whoever is attending and is interested in answering, just try to be quick in your answer. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. But if you want to think about the next question is a bonus question, and it's true or false, only one author is needed to conduct an evidence synthesis. Think about it, and you can drop your answers in the chat. True or false, only one author is needed to conduct an evidence synthesis. All right. So now that we've talked about the three types of evidence synthesis, so we said systematic reviews, scoping reviews, umbrella reviews, and we've compared those to narrative reviews, which are not evidence synthesis. One thing I'd like to draw your attention to, let me just minimize this, wonderful, is what JBI team are calling the big picture review family. And they've put scoping reviews, mapping reviews, and evidence and gap maps under that category. And I'd like to specifically focus on evidence and gap maps, or EGMs. These are systematic evidence synthesis products that have a very nice visual that allows you to interact with your findings by presenting your what you've captured in the literature and the search, and after the screening and data extraction, you present it in a tabular format, and we'll see a screenshot in a second. But the important thing is to say that it's high level with predefined codes for extraction. It's definitely following a systematic process. And it's the beauty of it is that it's online, it allows interaction, and you could place it on Funder's webpage, for example, or your own webpage. So this is an example of an evidence gap map. It's a screenshot, but I encourage you to visit 3IE's website, and I'll show you later where to specifically search for EGMs. But this is a screenshot of an EGM where you could see it has columns and rows. In the columns, we have the outcomes. The intersection that on the top left says total unique study is 192. So this is a number of studies that were included in this gap map on improving food security and humanitarian emergencies. And so in the rows, we have the intervention categories. So here we have food, cash, and other in-kind transfers. And we're seeing different types of interventions. But what you see as circles or bubbles is where there is evidence on the combination of intervention and outcome. And the larger the bubble, the more evidence exists. When the bubble is gray, this is what we refer to as impact evaluations. So RCTs, quasi-experimental, and so on and so on. Where the bubbles have different colors, such as red, green, or orange, these are systematic reviews. And these three colors refer to different levels of confidence. So this is following an appraisal using 3IE's critical appraisal tool. So we will not go into further details, but if you'd like to learn more, you can scan the QR code for this particular study or paper describing evidence gap maps. And then in order to search for evidence gap maps, you can go to the development evidence portal, which is 3IE's evidence portal, one of the biggest portals, living repositories for evidence from the humanitarian world, from low and middle income countries. And as you can see right now, it has 41 evidence gap maps. You can scan the QR code, and we can also share the links at the end. All right. So we've talked about some of the types. We've talked about evidence gap maps. And now, one question that many of you have asked before, or at least have thought of, can we fast track an evidence synthesis? Immediate answer is maybe. Before we go into details, let's focus on the maybe. It depends on your goals. It depends on why you want to fast track it. You don't get to fast track it just because you want to get done with it quickly. It has to be because it's responding to policy. It's responding to something urgent. And so you could run a rapid review to be timely, to provide decision makers with an answer at the time where they need it. But keep in mind that there will be trade-offs in rigor. It will take weeks to months, but there are methods to follow. There is always this debate about this trade-off between rigor and delivering on time. If you learn the processes very well, if you follow the steps very well, you will aim to reduce any risk for skipping steps, increasing bias, and so on and so on. So yes, you can conduct rapid reviews. Again, these are rapid systematic reviews, which most of you have answered correctly in the previous poll question. You could conduct it in a rapid manner, but make sure to stick to high rigor when doing the work. Now, what about a topic that is very well researched, where you've conducted your evidence synthesis, but there's a rising evidence continuously, and you're using it to inform a decision? What do you do in that case? Well, you could conduct a living review. Living reviews are, from their name, reviews are kept living, which means regularly updated to include recent evidence. You have to decide a priori whether you intend to keep your review living. And it is especially necessary when directly informing practice. You also have to maintain rigor and transparency throughout. So even when you're conducting an update or integrating new evidence, you have to follow the same steps you followed in the very first step of your evidence synthesis. All right, I'm just going to jump to the chat box and see how we're doing on the answer to my question. So I see lots of false. All right, wonderful. So to remind you, the question was only one author is needed to conduct an evidence synthesis, and most of you answered false, which is correct. This is specifically important to note because all the steps in an evidence synthesis, so let's say the screening at title abstract level or full text, the extraction, the appraisal, all of these require at least two people in most of the evidence synthesis. Now, again, rapid on the side. And so one author cannot conduct an evidence synthesis piece on their own. So great that everyone's on board. Now, something else I wanted to share with you today was what our colleagues are calling the evidence synthesis family. So we've learned about the different types. Now, how do we put them all together? What our colleagues have defined as evidence synthesis family is the overall group of systematic reviews, qualitative evidence synthesis, which is a systematic review of qualitative evidence, right, from its name. So it's a systematic review or an evidence synthesis where your eligibility criteria specifically includes study design and qualitative. Mixed methods reviews, overviews of reviews, and big picture review. As you can see, they've put out rapid review and living review as modes, not as specific types of their own, because rapid reviews and living reviews are following the methods for an evidence synthesis, just that the way they're done, so the mode for them is different. And it's very clear from this visual that we're separating all these from narrative reviews, which are not part of the family of evidence synthesis. All the members of the family of evidence synthesis follow formal methods, and they aim to maintain rigor throughout. Now, another way to look at it is by setting your review objective. And if it's about understanding what a particular topic is about, then you're conducting a primer or state-of-the-art review, so more of an introduction review. Alternatively, if you're specifically interested in what does the research evidence say, that's where evidence synthesis comes in. And then you're either looking at what research exists on a topic, and so you conduct a scoping review or a systematic map, or what do the study results show? And then you're looking at a rapid review, a systematic review, a realist review, or an overview of reviews. So we've learned about the types, we've learned about the question formulation, we've learned about how to choose. Now, how do you report an evidence synthesis? We've mentioned transparency so many times until now. It's very important to follow reporting standards. And you can go to the Equator Network. There's a list of standards to follow by study design. There are extensions and so on and so on. And specifically for systematic reviews or scoping reviews, you could go to PRISMA, which stands for Preferred Reporting Items for Systematic Reviews and Meta-Analysis. There's a checklist, there's a flow diagram, and typically when you're conducting a systematic review and most of evidence synthesis, you will present a flow diagram that shows the number of studies you've captured from the very first, so when you've run the search, then how many citations you've removed, for example, because they're duplicates, and then while screening at title abstract level, at full text level, how many you've excluded, and you have to be transparent about why you're excluding, and so on and so on. It will depend on the type of evidence synthesis again, but you have to be very transparent about them. And most of the journals by now require you to provide a checklist that shows where exactly you've reported the specific items that are required. Familiarize yourself with these tools before undertaking an evidence synthesis. Now, we've talked about reporting, but about quality. There are many types out there. We will not focus on that. I'm just listing a few for you to just go ahead and learn about them. But there are quality appraisal tools for primary studies and for evidence synthesis. So if you're conducting an evidence synthesis, you'll need to appraise the quality of the included primary studies. If you're conducting an umbrella review, you'll need to appraise the quality of the systematic review. And so there's a long list of those. I just want to draw your attention to all of these, but also make sure you're always checking for whether these tools are updated. Many of them are work in progress. Many of them are learning from what's happened so far. And so make sure you use the most updated version of any tool you choose. Now, before we proceed, I have one more question for you. And this is a bonus question, so it's not something we've covered, but something I want you to think about. When to discuss the protocol with interest holders. And for those of you who are not familiar with the terminology interest holders, it means you're probably familiar with stakeholders. And interest holders is the new term that is preferred rather than stakeholders, and it means anyone who could be affected or impacted by the decision made. So again, the question is live on Slido, but also for those who want to answer here in the chat box, when would you discuss the protocol with interest holders? And let's track the results as they come in. The options are since conceptualization, after publishing the protocol, or we don't discuss the protocol, we only disseminate findings to interest holders. All right, so the answer is since conceptualization, and that's what most of you have said. Perfect. So if you have been involved in the world of evidence synthesis or in the ecosystem overall, or in any of the discussions, you would be aware that there's a lot of focus recently. I mean, for a couple years, or at least a decade now, but more recently, a lot of focus on engaging with interest holders because we want our evidence synthesis to be as relevant and as usable as possible by anyone who could be affected by its results. And so it's very important to conceptualize your design, your evidence synthesis, and engage interest holders throughout, specifically when defining your question and afterwards. All right. So what about AI? can AI run my evidence synthesis? The answer is not at this stage. Until today, we are aware that there are AI tools out there that could assist in screening, for example, using classifiers or data extraction by coding. And if you've used any, please provide us with the name of the tools that you've used. You can scan the QR code or use the link. And let us know what tools you've used to help you conduct your evidence synthesis. But it's very important to stress on the fact that existing AI tools are doing a lot of progress, specifically in screening and data extraction. Some of them are already testing for critical appraisal and certainty evidence assessment, so the grade assessment, for example. But it's very important to be aware that they are not ready yet to take over. You could use them to make your work more efficient, but you have to be testing as you go. You have to check out the validity of the models that have been used to train the particular model, the algorithms, and so on and so on. And to work with people who are experts in understanding the models themselves and their implications on your work. So you want to use it, you could use it in parallel to your work, let it assist you, but it cannot take over yet. So if you are an evidence synthesis developer and you're worried about your skills, you're still very useful right now. We still have a lot to do before AI takes over, if it ever will. All right, so let's see what AI tools you have used. We still have answers coming, so I'll leave it open. And we'll move to our last slides before sharing the results. So before we close, I'd like to share a couple important tips. First, before you undertake any evidence synthesis, please identify whether an existing one is out there that answers your needs, that fits your question before you go on conducting your own. Second, make sure to be inclusive, adopt an equity lens, and engage interest holders. There's a lot of equity tools out there. There's the Progress Plus framework that you could use to follow to help you structure your evidence synthesis. So make sure to adopt those. And always in research, aim to inform and add to what is known and avoid research waste. So the key messages for today. First of all, evidence synthesis is a universe of methods aiming to systematically identify and synthesize existing evidence. Certain types require appraisal of the evidence, while others only aim for mapping. Excuse me. The key is in framing the question. You could be too narrow or too broad. You want to be somewhere in between. It depends on your objectives. The right review for your question, once your objectives are clear, then your question is clear, then you have to be able to identify, based on today's session, what type of review is best for you, and make sure to avoid research waste. And last, in terms of AI, use AI to assist, not to replace human judgment. Before I close, I'd just like to acknowledge the governance team who have helped me get ready for today and organize this webinar. I heard we have a huge number of registered and participants. So thank you all for joining, and thanks to the governance team for getting us ready, and 3IE team for the support always. And as I mentioned before, the list of references can be shared. Feel free to reach out for questions, but we'll open the floor now for questions also. And just to share the AI tools that people are using, let's see what we have. So we have Covidence, none so far, ChatGPT, Consensus. Great. So thank you for sharing that. And that is it from my end. So we open the floor for questions.
Thank you so much, Tamara. I'll also add, if you have any questions specifically about Covidence, we are running a Covidence 101 webinar the end of this month, and also a webinar specific to scoping reviews. Let me put that link in the chat where you can register instead of scanning the QR code. But some questions. I saw a good question, Tamara, if you want to answer this one. Why do some of these steps in review types require 2 or more people? Or why would you need more than one person to work on these reviews?
Absolutely. Thanks, Stephanie. So again, what's very important to keep in mind is when conducting evidence synthesis, we're aiming for the highest level of quality, of rigor, and reducing bias as much as possible. When we have one person making a judgment, there's always a risk for bias, and it would be reduced when 2 people are screening the same studies for eligibility, for example, independently, and then comparing the results. When screening studies, for example, or citations for an evidence synthesis, especially if you've conducted a search that has led to 15,000 records, for example, while screening, we could tend to skip some citations here or there, or make a judgment based on what we thought is right, forget to look at our screening criteria and again because we think that we have them very clear in our head. Doing things in duplicate would reduce risk for error and would reduce risk of bias. And also, in case either authors has some sort of a conflict, previously worked on a topic, is an author of some studies and so on, and would like to get them included. I'm not saying it happens, but I'm just giving you an example of biases that could happen. Screening in duplicate will help you reduce that risk for bias. And ideally, you'd have, from the beginning, identified a 3rd reviewer who you will go to when the team of 2 reviewers or the pair is facing discrepancies in relation to some citations. And so they'll seek the input from a 3rd reviewer, even as an external one, to make a decision in such case.
Thank you. Thank you. Got a lot of other good questions coming in, but one that was asked more toward the beginning in reference to critical appraisal. So you mentioned you got to do critical appraisal for a systematic review. Can you do one during a scoping review too?
Yeah, that's a great question. You could definitely do that. So the nice thing about the scoping review is that it's flexible. You can choose to appraise the quality of the studies you're including. It really depends on the objective of the scoping review that you are developing. It could be just for mapping. It could be for informing in a specific way or a specific audience, and you have the resources to conduct appraisal. And you know that, for example, the purpose of your scoping review is to then feed into a set of questions that you will develop systematic reviews for, or decide what primary studies you need to develop. And so that's why critical appraisal could be very important for you for this particular scoping review. So it's okay to do it. It's not a requirement.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we have time for a couple more. Somebody asked in reference to the evidence gap map that you showed, that screenshot, how were those bubbles generated? Talk about why some bubbles are bigger, some are smaller, I think, and how that was generated.
Yeah, for sure. So at RE, we use our own software. So the way it's done is you're doing your screening, you do your extraction. As part of your extraction, you have your components for the gap map. So obviously the interventions and outcomes, but also characteristics of the included studies, which you'll define a priori. And by the way, if you go to the website of the DEP or evidence gap map itself, you'll find there will be filters. So you could even filter your map to specifically look at studies that covered a particular age group or have covered an equity component and so on and so on. And so all these things are done in a way where you've extracted your data using a particular software, and then that software is integrated within a platform that we have, and it will push the data in a way to show where there's a concentration or cluster of studies versus where there's a gap. So I'm happy to give more details on that in a particular session on evidence gap maps, in terms of the software, how to do it, and so on, or feel free to send me an email if you have interest specifically in evidence gap maps. Now, in terms of the size and so on, the bigger the bubble, the more evidence there is. The smaller the bubble, the less evidence there is. A white cell means that there are gaps. And you'll see in some evidence gap maps, some intersection cells will have NA, which means not applicable. And this is specifically for when the intersection between an outcome and an intervention is not logical, so we don't expect to find any evidence, and so we either block it by writing down an A, or I've seen authors that have graded out, or so on and so on.
Thank you. Another one somebody had is, what's the difference between grade and Prisma? I think you covered both of those in your session, but touching again on those.
Absolutely, great question. So Prisma is one of the tools that is used to report on your evidence synthesis, which means you're doing the work, but you're writing down how you're doing it step by step to make sure you're transparent. And so Prisma itself refers to preferred reporting items in systematic reviews and meta-analysis. Grade, on the other hand, is an approach that we use to assess the certainty in the evidence that we're capturing. So think about it this way. I'm doing my systematic review. So I searched, I screened, I appraised the literature, and now I'm synthesizing and I want to write down my manuscript. I will follow Prisma to make sure that I'm following all the steps and reporting on all the steps I did. However, when I'm critically appraising the literature and I want to assess how certain am I in the primary studies that I've included in my systematic review, that's where I'll use grade, because grade has a set of domains such as inconsistency, imprecision, indirectness, recursive bias, publication bias, and these will help me understand how confident I am in the evidence that's coming from this primary study that will feed into my systematic review. So one is about quality of included studies, and the other is a reporting tool, which is Prisma, of the steps of the systematic review.
Great, thank you, thank you. I'm just looking through any other questions. Thank you, team, for answering a lot of these questions that have come through. One question we got is about some qualitative versus mixed methods. Some of these review types, can they be used for qualitative or mixed methods projects?
Yeah, so for mixed methods in particular, it will depend on how you're structuring your mixed method review. So there are different ways of addressing it. And so in some processes, you will include both quantitative and qualitative research, but in your analysis itself, you'll keep them split. So everything about quantitative together, everything about qualitative together. There are other ways to approach this. This would require a session of its own, but I'm happy to answer follow-up questions by email if anyone's interested.
All right, I think we are right at time. So thank you so much, Tamara, for joining us today. Thank you, everyone who has joined us live. And for those of you who are watching the recording, thank you so much for making it this far. You should get a recording of this sent to the email you used to register about 24 hours after the session, and we'll also post the recording on our recent webinars page. Thank you so much, and hope to catch you again on another webinar.